Answered in Kind 19 on empathy, authority, and the catastrophe of binding what was never taught. Many of us have been striving with aching sincerity to appeal to the humanity in others. We speak to conscience, to compassion, to shared dignity, believing, perhaps naively, perhaps nobly, that these are universal faculties. And yet, with increasing clarity, it becomes evident that for some, empathy is not merely dormant, it is functionally absent, atrophied through neglect, or systematically anesthetized. One cannot awaken a sense that has never been exercised, nor can one reason a person into caring when care itself is regarded as expendable. This recognition is not cruel, it is sober. Rights that require permission are not rights at all. They are leverage. They are conditional allowances, revocable at the whim of authority, dangled like favors rather than recognized as intrinsic. A right that must be granted can just as easily be withdrawn, and history demonstrates relentlessly that it will be. And so we must ask, with grave seriousness, in what conceivable moral universe does it make sense for those who lack empathy for their brothers and sisters to wield dominion over those who possess that beauteous regard for life? Authority divorced from compassion is not leadership, it is administration of harm. Instead of teaching, we have been banning. Instead of cultivating self-mastery, we have been binding. Instead of education, prohibition. Instead of understanding, punishment. This is the perennial failure of brittle systems. They outlaw what they do not comprehend, criminalize what they have never taken the time to study, and suppress what they are unwilling to integrate. Men are meant to lead, they proclaim, often with chests puffed and minds conspicuously underdeveloped, and then proceed to excuse ignorance as though it were a birthright, as though maleness itself conferred wisdom, as though leadership were a genital function rather than a capacity of consciousness, discernment, emotional regulation, and vision. But what of the men who are not natural-born leaders? What of those who strive earnestly, who labor to grow, but for whom leadership is simply not their innate orientation? Must they posture, dominate, and pretend, wreaking havoc in roles they were never meant to occupy? And what of women who are unmistakably natural-born leaders, clear-sighted, steady, integrative, capable of holding complexity without fracture? Are they to silence themselves when they perceive a better route, a more humane possibility, a wiser course of action? To demand that they do so would be a form of violence against their very nature. It would be neglect masquerading as order. And neglect, when institutionalized, ossifies into cruelty. We bar people from substances, from practices, from choices, without ever teaching them self-mastery. We ban plants instead of teaching reverence for nature, external and internal alike. We criminalize rather than cultivate. We bind rather than guide, and all the while, we feign shock at the consequences of a society that has been systematically deprived of education in self-regulation, discernment, and embodied wisdom. Freedom without education is perilous, but education without freedom is tyranny. People, disturbingly, are very selective about whose suffering they are willing to tolerate, very selective about who they are comfortable with dying. It's only a small percentage, they say, as though minority suffering were a rounding error, as though compassion were a matter of statistics rather than principle. This calculus, this moral triage, reveals a chilling deficit of empathy. For the measure of a society is not how it treats the majority, but how it safeguards the vulnerable, the marginal, the few. I dare say this plainly. Those who lack empathy have no ethical claim to rule over those who possess it. And yet, paradoxically, it often appears to be the case that those who stand most firmly within their compassion are precisely the ones excluded from power, while those with cavernous blind spots to human pain ascend through systems engineered to reward callousness. Is it not curious, if not damning, that so many who claim unshakable conviction simultaneously exhibit an astonishing indifference to suffering? Here we encountered the phenomenon once named social murder, a term emerging in the late 19th century to describe a particular kind of violence, the construction of systems that make suffering and premature death not only foreseeable, but inevitable, while absolving any individual of direct responsibility. No single hand pulls the trigger. No single person wields the blade. The killing is distributed, bureaucratized, anonymized. Responsibility is diffused into policy, regulation, and the way things are. And so we wash our hands. How faithful, then, can we verily claim to be when we exhibit such little faith in our fellow human beings' capacity for growth? How righteous is a system that trusts prohibition more than education, punishment more than mentorship, binding more than teaching, to outlaw what could heal many, plants, practices, freedoms, simply because access is uneven or understanding incomplete, is to throw the seed into the ground and curse it for not bearing fruit. O ye of little faith indeed. So many clench their teeth, tense their bodies, and barricade their identities by barring others from theirs. They mistake exclusion for strength, rigidity for virtue, domination for order. They strive ferociously to be what they are not, and in doing so, they bleed their vitality into maintaining a facade that requires constant vigilance. Empathy is not a weakness. It is an advanced human capacity. It is the recognition that aiding another is not altruism divorced from self-interest, but enlightened self-preservation. When you help your brother or sister, you help the whole, and you are part of that whole, whether you acknowledge it or not. Those who lack this reverent regard for life cannot be forced to acquire it. No law can compel compassion. No decree can mandate conscience. And yet, how often do such individuals strive to strip empathy from those who possess it naturally, to keep them subdued, marginalized, in their place, so that extraction, economic, emotional, or social, may continue unimpeded? What is it truly when one believes oneself above another, yet requires that other to suffer in order to feel secure? When one's prosperity depends upon another's precarity, it is not superiority. It is parasitism dressed up in ideology. Shame and guilt have been wielded so relentlessly throughout society that some of the most conscientious, tender-hearted people live in perpetual anxiety that they may not be good enough, while those who inflict the greatest harm remain utterly untroubled. Shame, in this context, is not a moral guide. It is a tool of compliance. It is useful only to those who seek control. And so they say, you should be ashamed of yourself. But what if the one being addressed feels no shame, because they have done no wrong? And what if the finger pointing itself is the true transgression? By what authority do we cast shame instead of extending the open palm of instruction and understanding? Why must children, adolescents, and even adults be burdened with shame when so many of our so-called leaders model none? Proclaiming oneself pro-life while exhibiting profound disregard for the living is a contradiction so stark it borders on parody. To ignore the cries of suffering, to cast out those with less, to treat empathy as expendable. This is not reverence for life, it is desecration. True worth is not measured in accumulation, but in capacity. The capacity to care, to respond, to serve. Money, endlessly collected, never fills the void it promises to. Control, relentlessly pursued, never delivers peace. These are packages that never arrive, and yet people wait their entire lives by the door. Perhaps it is time to invert the logic of banning and binding. Perhaps those demonstrably lacking compassion, those willing to consign others to alleys, to cages, to silence, should be barred from seats of power. For leadership without empathy is not leadership at all, it is hazard. We may never be able to reach those who have closed themselves off so voraciously that no appeal penetrates. They plug their ears as they always have, but it is not incumbent upon us to become like them in any order to contend with them. It is incumbent upon us to continue closing the gaps, to remain anchored in what is humane, to stand firm without hardening. For those who lack compassion will not outlast those who embody it. Their lives become revolving doors of depletion, bleeding vitality, chasing dominance, grasping for validation that never satisfies. They burn themselves out, trying to extract from others what can only be cultivated within. To relinquish judgment, condemnation, envy, jealousy, deceit, gossip, hatred, and self-pity. To drop these into the soil as fertilizer for our own divine expansion is not naivete. It is alchemy. It is the fountain of youth. To refuse to clutch the electric barbed wire of resentment that so many wrap around the throats of the innocent is to choose coherence over chaos. Where you focus, there you are. What you send out returns, not as punishment, but as resonance. Karma is not a cosmic scorekeeper. It is not concerned with spectacle or timing. It is coherence. It is alignment. It is the inescapable echo of one's inner state. Often, its consequences are internal, a narrowing of joy, a dimming of vitality, a chronic dis-ease that no amount of external success can soothe. And so we return again to the quiet truth so many resist. Nothing compares to the warmth of love. Nothing rivals the steadiness of compassion. Nothing endures like a life lived in service to the dignity of others. We will outlast, not by force, but by fidelity to what is human. And when judgment is relinquished, when binding gives way to teaching, when fear is composted into wisdom, when empathy is allowed to lead, what you have sown will always return, answered in kind. Praise love and pass the compassion. The light speaks once and forever.